Welcome, everyone, to the ICSS Sunday Morning Marxist Forum. My name is Alan Miller, and I'm a member of the program committee for ICSS Sunday Morning Sessions. We're based in Oakland, California, in the San Francisco Bay Area, USA. Our programs are online via Zoom Sunday mornings at 10:30 a.m. Pacific Time. You can sign up at our website, icssmarks.org. That's icssmarks.org to receive email announcements for future Sunday sessions. You can also view videos of past presentations, send us a message using our contact form, which again is at icssmarks.org. We want to call your attention to our donation page where you can make a donation to support our program. A lot going on in the world these days. We have a very important program today on the American working class and imperial eclipse. Our speaker is Marxist public historian Peter Fay, who at the age of 23, as a machinist and open communist, overcoming company red baiting, won a seat on the executive board of a 1,100 member steelworkers local. He also organized for the United Electrical Workers and District 1199 of the Health and Hospital Workers Union. Peter also managed electoral campaigns for the NAACP desegregation suit. Years later, after a workplace injury, Peter became a software engineer and public historian, focusing on New England slavery and early labor movements. Today, Peter publishes on labor and Black history, teaches Marx's Capital, and serves on the boards of several historical societies in Rhode Island. We're going to start with a presentation by Peter and an interview, and after a short break for announcements, a discussion where you can all express your views and ask questions. So, welcome to Sunday Morning Marxist Forum, Peter. So, go ahead and take it from there.
Okay. Uh, Thanks. I'm hoping uh, you can hear me okay.
Yes.
So when I described my talk today, I wanted to really focus on something really pretty important to us all, and that is, of course, the state of the working class today and the state of the world in which workers make their living, and that being in both the United States as the center of imperial power in the world, and workers, of course, in other countries as well. So I thought that I described what I was going to talk about by saying that the workers, stand on the precipice of an uncertain future. And then, of course, behind us is a century of U.S. global dominance and a number of decades of economic decline in our standard of living. So I'm sure that much of this is not new to you. It's anyone that's older than 50 or 60 remembers the devastating destruction of deindustrialization, which started around 1975 or so, and the so-called globalization, which started in the 1990s. And what I'd like to do to start off is just show you what this looks like uh, in terms of economic and social chaos that has been wrought upon America by the development of capital in the premier hegemonic capitalist state of America. So, by the way, just as a note, these four workers are members of the Steelworkers Union, of which I was a member for quite a few years as well in my younger days. I'm not any longer, because of course you can't be a member of the Steelworkers unless you were actually employed at the workplace. So, what did this long trajectory of American power look like? This is the progression of industrial output across from 1923 until 2023. So this is 100 years of American industrial output. And as you can see, it was moderate up until World War II started. Right before World War II started, industrial production in the United States took off and has been growing by leaps and bounds ever since. Until, of course, we get to the current period in the last couple of decades where it's more or less leveled off. This is the industrial production in terms of value from 1973 until 2024. This is basically the history of my working life. This is what the total product of industrial production in America since I entered the workforce. The difference is in red in the number of people employed in production. Again, this is in my lifetime and many of yours as well. There was substantial employment in manufacturing all through up until the 70s and 80s, at which point it started to decline. Yet, while employment declined, you can see the blue line continue to rise, and they are absolutely, opposite directions of growth. The growth in employment continues to fall. Growth in employment and manufacturing continues to fall, whereas the product that is being produced continues to grow. How the heck does this happen? Well, it happens this way, through productivity, growth in productivity from 1948 up until that key year, which, we all know is around the middle of the 70s, 74, 75. The wages kept up with increases in productivity. And suddenly in 1973, we have this total breakout of difference in productivity and wages, whereas suddenly wages totally stop growing. This is the hourly compensation on the bottom, the dark blue line on the bottom. So starting around 1975, hourly compensation suddenly uh, stopped growing and stayed flat for the rest of our lifetime. So basically, most of my working life, hourly compensation has been essentially flat. Okay. And at the same time, one other aspect of the, what workers have faced in the last 100 years is on the bottom line, the growth in union membership, which exploded right before World War II started and had reached a peak right after World War II. And union membership as a percentage of the workforce has steadily declined ever since then. Again, mirroring the income of the wealthiest in society, which is the top line. And we are now approaching what we saw in the pre-depression era of the robber time of the robber barons of the Mellons, Carnegies, and Rockefellers, who basically sucked up all the income of the nation during that time. So that's pretty much the 30,000-foot view. I'm going to stop sharing for a moment here. So that's what transpired with the condition of the working class in our lifetimes. A massive expansion of capital leading up to and during World War II. And then the peak of trade union power and around right after World War II, when 35% of the workforce was organized, often organized, of course, by communist organized and led unions, including United Electrical Workers, which was the third largest union in the country. I think they believe they had around 650,000 members. Just think of that. as you know, for those who are socialists or Marxists of one stripe or another, 650,000 members of a union that was founded and led by essentially members, communists and Marxists for the most part, not entirely, but large numbers of the leadership were communists. The destruction of the unions, starting in this period, right after the 40s and in the 50s, during the Red Scare, was led by corporate America with the help of the Catholic Church, both parties, Democrats and Republicans, and all media and academia, all joining up to attack the unions, while the CIO itself raided its own unions. And we saw the destruction of the leftist unions, including UE and others, leather workers and other radical unions, and expelled many of the leadership of these militant unions. By the 70s and 80s, labor was crushed by automation, speed up, layoffs, and runaway shops to Asia, where suddenly we had austerity, union busting, and new anti-worker legislation. So that's kind of the trace of history which led us to our world today that we know. But I'd now like to step back and approach this whole issue from a different perspective, not from the perspective of things, of dollars or commodities being produced and exchanged in the marketplace, but instead approach it from the perspective of humans, by us, the perspective of workers. And no one better explains this perspective of the world of the worker than Karl Marx. Marxism is fundamentally the science of how humans transform the nature surrounding them. In his first volume of Capital, Marx called this activity the labor process, quote, the necessary condition for the affecting exchange of matter between man and nature. It is the everlasting nature-imposed condition of the human existence. He wrote that in Volume 1 of Capital. So this labor process that Marx described is common to all humanity across all time, not simply under capitalism. It may take different social forms at different times. We all know this. For example, here where I am, in Rhode Island, before Europeans arrived, Narragansetts Indians hunted deer, which were called atuk, and they carved soapstone bowls for their social reproduction. This is how they lived and survived. Slaves working didn't work the land in ancient Rome, and serfs were tied to the land growing crops in the Middle Ages, 1/3 of which they extracted under the threat of coercion or expulsion or even death. But today we have a different relation of production and reproduction of our lives. That labor process predominantly takes the form of wage labor, the sale of our work effort during the day to the capitalist in exchange for wages. It is this so-called free exchange of commodities, our selling of our labor, purchased by the capitalists, which since 1975 has been at best flat, if not declining. And I shared this with you with that slide I showed earlier. It is, and although we sell our labor power for pittance for our survival, the capitalist happily pays it because he then owns the social substance deposited in our products of labor. That is, the value created by us in the workplace. And our labor that creates that substance, value, which is eventually embodied as money, has been ever more productive over time, as we can see in the chart that I shared as well on productivity. This process of the products of our creative power being divorced from us by the rights of private property is called alienation, and most Marxists are familiar with that term. Even psychologists are familiar with that term. Our product is alienated from our possession. As Marx showed, the vast network of human social practices is done by humans without realizing what lies underneath them. He said, quote, they do this without being aware of it. For example, he said, quote, anyone can use money as money without necessarily understanding what money is. Now, this is an interesting paradox when you think about it. How can people use money or do certain social interactions without being fully aware of what is behind them? Let's look more closely at the most common everyday process that we all contribute to but do not see, the alienation of labor. From our very first day on our job until our last day of work in our lives, the value and the use values that we create for the capitalists are immediately alienated. They are taken into his possession. They become the property of the capitalist in furtherment of the dictates of capital. This is always to the detriment of the creator of this value, the worker. Now, let me illustrate this with my own life. When I was 16, the minimum wage was $1.60 an hour. Imagine my excitement when I landed a plum job making $7 an hour. I couldn't believe my luck. I started working 40 hours a week in a factory called American Microwave in Waltham, Massachusetts. And let me just share a example of what this was like. Okay. So I was working for a company in Massachusetts making microwave parts. I molded microwave tubing into shapes according to blueprints and provided that were provided by the engineering department. This work destroyed my fingers, but I was rolling in money. I couldn't believe my luck until I discovered what the product of my alienated labor was used for. It was used for top secret radar components. This is what they didn't tell me when I was hired. The products of my labor were going into B-52 Stratocaster as the radar component in the nose of the aircraft. They had what was called a ANAPQ 166 radar, and the little components that I made were part of the control of that radar. So for the last 45 years, the the labor which was alienated from me at American Microwave has been used in B-52 bombers. I get it. All right. So that shows you what alienated labor looks like. Um, Let me just come back to this. Hold on a second. Okay. I need to try and share that one more time. Okay, here we are. Oh, sorry. Okay. So, a little bit of technical difficulties, but essentially, these B-52 Stratofortress can carry 70,000 pounds of ordnance. And the radar that I helped to create has been used, that very same radar has been used for the last uh, 45 years in all the bombings that America has taken part in. So all the way from the Vietnam War, where we dropped 4 times the tonnage of bombs than all the bombs that had been dropped in World War II. including also B-52 drop 1,620 sorties in Operation Desert Storm in 1991, the bombing of Yugoslavia in 1999, Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan in 2001, Iraqi Freedom 2003, bombing of Syria in 2016, and you get the message. Finally ending with the Taliban offensive in 2021. And this year, in the last 2 months, Operation Epic Fury in Iran, still using the very same B-52 bombers that I helped to produce the radar for. So my alienated labor was used against the working class and peasants of the entire world for 57 years. Not, of course, only me, but the American working class, which helped to create this military juggernaut until the radar finally reached the end of its lifetime, which is just in the last several months, they're finally replacing that radar. So this was the first lesson for me in the alienation of my labor. I told some of the other people I was working with that what I had found out about our secret product, that it was going into B-52s. And when I did that, I was brought into the office naively, brought into the office of the HR department, and they asked me if I was a communist. I was 16 and I wasn't really entirely sure what that meant. Then they asked me if I was trying to organize a union. And before I even really could answer that I wasn't aware of any union campaign, they fired me. But my experience is not necessarily the same of all alienated labor. Not all of it ends up in military products, but all of it nonetheless becomes property of capitalists for the purpose of once again reproducing and expanding that capital. A colleague of Marx, Feuerbach, who was a critic of Hegel, influenced Marx's ideas, attempting to take into when he decided to take real human beings as his point of departure rather than the Hegelian abstract concept of alienation, which Hegel developed. In the economic and philosophical manuscripts of 1844, Marx identified alienation as arising from the concrete alienation of one's own labor. This is how we know it today. But after 2 decades of studying political economy, Marx, when he wrote Capital in the 1860s, crystallized and refocused this process of labor being appropriated for use by the capitalists. He gave it a much more expansive view of the totality of the cycle of reproduction of capital rather than simply as alienation. He said, quote, "The worker's product not only constantly converted into commodities, but also into capital, that is, into value that sucks up the worker's value-creating power, means of subsistence that actually purchase human beings, constantly produces objective wealth in the form of capital, and alien power that dominates and exploits them." So he really considers this more as an alien power over and above the worker. It is yet another process that happens behind the back of the worker without their conscious knowledge, though many instinctively feel it. The feeling of alienated labor breaks out into the open every so often, such as when the booming production of capital leads the capitalist to install new machinery, putting the worker out on the street. Or when capital in the 1980s and 90s started to leave the country, when capitalists used the profits produced by workers to move their production to China, Brazil, and other low-wage countries. When does the working class ever rise up against capital's onslaught? What prevents consciousness from seeking out the path to end this insanity of capitalist destruction? Well, this is a really difficult question, one that, Marxists and revolutionaries have struggled with for forever, for decades and centuries. Are we bought off? Was my extraordinarily high pay of $7 an hour in the 1971, was that a sop to keep me quiet? Those in the plant that knew that we were make what we were making did keep quiet, though some like me did not. Is it possible for capital to simply pay off part of the working class to disregard its own best interests? Many leftists today answer this dilemma with a simplistic answer. They say the working class has created collaborators amongst the leaders of the class who betray the vast number of workers who in fact want revolution right now. We see this today, and I saw this only last summer, this type of attitude when I was helping the 1199 on the picket line when they were striking against Butler Hospital in Providence, Rhode Island. The healthcare workers, which numbered over 1,000, were out on strike, uh, struggling, bargaining with the company to try and get them to accept improved safety conditions and better wages. At the same time we were doing this, the so-called leftists on the World Socialist website published articles about our strike, and I'm going to quote from their article. It says, 1199, the union apparatus has isolated their struggle of the workers and refused to mobilize the wider membership in protests. Workers must mobilize from below to override these betrayals. Workers must form rank and file committee to take control of the strike. An expansion of the struggle is only possible through a fight against 1199 SEIU apparatus, which is joined at the hip with the pro-capitalist Democratic Party and with management. So this is one interpretation of when and whether the American working class is bought out, becomes bourgeois, becomes class collaborationist. So, over our lifetime, we've seen many of these types of approaches from Trotskyists and other, saboteurs or wreckers of working class struggles. And certainly not all of them feel this way, but it is common among some leftist circles to view the enemy to be the union leadership. So what then is the explanation of what's going on? What causes workers to not rise up when they could? What causes them to not become revolutionary, to take a revolutionary perspective? To answer this, we must enter the rarefied debates about capital's coercive influence on proletarian consciousness. This is this is Western Marxism, what Georgy Lukács called the revolutionary subject, that is, the subject who acts upon the world, perhaps in a revolutionary manner. So this question of if, how, and why the proletariat is by disposition revolutionary is broached by Marx in the Communist Manifesto. The proletariat alone is a really revolutionary class, he says. And why is this? Because, quote, the proletarians cannot become masters of the productive forces of society except by abolishing their own previous mode of appropriation. Their mission is to destroy all previous securities for and insurances of individual property, unquote. And this is a view that he repeated throughout his life, writing Capital in 1867, and then again in the Gotha program in 1875. So unlike all the other classes, workers can only free themselves by freeing all of society. But will they spontaneously? Will they do it without any prompt from anybody else, without any refocusing of their consciousness or their attention? Lenin, when he wrote What is to be Done in 1902, said absolutely not. Only party organization, agitation, and propaganda can develop proletarian consciousness from outside of the class. But this was not a discovery of Lenin, but of Marx himself. In 1852, following the uncompleted revolutions of 1848, Marx wrote, "Men make their own history, but they do not make it just as they please. They do not make it under the circumstances chosen by themselves, but under circumstances directly encountered, given, and transmitted from the past. The tradition of all the dead generations weighs like a nightmare on the brain of the living." In other words, we are conditioned by our past, by our social environment, by the consciousness that we see reproduced in society. Humans in society tend to reproduce themselves and reproduce their social relations. In doing so, it takes a tremendous break of consciousness and a break from history to displace this self-reproduction, which is often seen as vital to survival. As Frederick Jameson said, "It is easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism." This is a somewhat cynical view, but there is a grain of truth to it. America in the last century spent inordinate amounts of effort and money imagining the first scenario, the end of the world, and has come close to achieving it several times over. Luckily, it has not fully achieved that. On the other hand, the Soviet Union imagined the second scenario, the end of capitalism, and achieved it with great sacrifice, tremendous sacrifice, even if it was only impermanent achievement. But Marx never preferred a theory of bourgeoisification of the proletariat. Only in Engels' letters to Marx did Engels write, quote, "The English proletariat is actually becoming more and more bourgeois." And he repeats this in a number of works throughout his life, including all the way up through late 1890s, where he saw the English proletariat becoming more and more bourgeois. Some of Marx's enemies, particularly Mikhail Bakunin, a Russian anarchist, attacked Marx's insistence of the proletariat rising to the ruling class as, quote, "nothing more or less than a new aristocracy, that of the urban and industrial workers, to the exclusion of the millions who make up the rural proletariat." This was another origin of the aristocracy of labor theory, anarchism. This did not prevent German social democrats, after Engels' death, to convert Engels' observations into a theory of aristocracy of labor. So one of those theoreticians was Karl Kautsky, who said in 1909, "The unions, and to a greater extent their leaders, have been bought and duped by concessions and have become an aristocracy of labor." And we all know that when Lenin wrote Imperialism, he likewise was influenced by Kautsky's references and Engels' references to this tendency of the upper crust of the union movement to become bought out and bourgeoisified. So imperialism infected the aristocracy of the working class, the highest paid stratum. But once again, I'm going to kind of wrap this up and give you an example of the highest paid stratum of the working class, which for a short period of time I actually was able to belong to, and I'm actually grateful for that. So let me show you what this was like. I worked when I was younger and had an infant and a wife to support. I sought out the best employment I could find, and I found it. The best place that workers in central Massachusetts could ever hope to find a job was working in a steelworker shop at Wyman Gordon. After working for years in other shops and getting elected to office and learning machinist skills, I landed a job at at Wyman Gordon Company, which was a foundry and machine shop that manufactures aerospace parts for the largest conglomerates in the world, Pratt and Whitney, General Electric, Sikorsky, and others. So this gives you a taste of what some of the production facilities were like in this location. I happen to work in the machine shop, which produced some of the outer rings that go into this General Electric jet engine. I also, unsurprisingly, produced parts for all kinds of other aircraft, including Black Hawks. And I produced this actual rotor, which is made out of titanium, which is one of the worst machinist jobs, jobs that I did during all the production at Wyman Gordon. A very difficult job of drilling out the titanium from this hub. We were paid extremely high wages, somewhere around $12.50 an hour in 1983. And when you include the incentive pay and overtime and everything else, we were making far more than that. So we were actually making really, really good money at the time. The top pressmen that were running this 50,000 ton press making titanium parts were making approximately $40,000 a year in 1983. They were working somewhere around 4 to 6 hours a day, and the rest of the day they kind of hung around in between setup and everything. So this is definitely the upper stratum of the working class amongst the steelworkers. However, the high pay was won by a 20-year campaign to get the union recognized and through many brutal strikes. I joined the union, was a member of a rank and file platform of candidates with some other militant leaders against the corrupt local leadership and the steelworkers that had backing from a collaborationist steelworker district staff. I was red baited, and they attempted to prevent me from running from the executive office because I was a communist, openly. The NLRB intervened and rejected the protest, and they also rejected the Steelworkers Constitution, which had a clause which prohibited membership by communists from membership in the steelworkers. As a result, I won the election in a 2-to-1 landslide over the old collaborationist leadership. We then went out on strike. We won a better contract. And after this was settled, I spoke in a union membership meeting to the members of the Steelworkers Union. By the way, this is the Bullard vertical turret lathe, which I was similar to what I operated in the plant. And we went out on strike. This is us walking the picket line, 1985, I think it was. So, okay, you'll see in the background here on the left, a bunch of open air mines, which the company that I worked for owned in South Africa in the 1980s. Again, this was apartheid South Africa, and I brought up to my union meeting that the company owned titanium mines in South Africa ruled by our apartheid state. I described the protest against apartheid by the ANC in trying to overthrow the government. And this was very heartily accepted by the union membership. Virtually everybody was supportive of the ANC's efforts to overthrow the government in South Africa, even though they were the upper stratum of the working class in the United States. When I finished my talk to the union membership about how the struggle in South Africa was trying to end apartheid, I got a standing ovation. And therefore, I was convinced that despite some leftist views about this bourgeoisification of the working class. Yes, many of my coworkers voted for Reagan. Many of them were racist. Many of them were black. Many of them were women. It was a multi-ethnic, dis, uh, multi-religion. Many there were Jews and Muslims among our membership, and despite all the differences, when it comes down to the rubber hitting the road in the workplace, everyone stuck together. It was 100% participation on the picket line, 100% support of the union struggle. So it is often a very kind of difficult thing to try and uh, ferret out uh, what are the differences that can, in some circumstances, lead a working class to support politically dead end or bourgeois types of perspectives, where at other times they will support a militant or even at times revolutionary perspective. It is not a simple question and has no simple answer. But with that, I'd like to kind of end this and bring this back to Alan to follow up with whatever you want to say, Alan.
Thank you, Peter. We're gonna continue this part of today's session with a few questions that we prepared ahead of time to ask Peter. But in the meantime, I would ask everybody to note your own questions that you'd like to talk about. This is a very important topic. It's something that really gives you an opportunity to express your views about what's going on today in the U.S. working class. So go ahead and prepare, and we'll shift over to audience questions in a few minutes. So, but let me start by asking you a couple of questions about that tie back into your presentation. You made a very clear and compelling point about the decline of uh, manufacturing employment in the U.S. Starting in say in the 80s, and I think it really accelerating later on in the 2000s. And my first question is, how do you see, as Marx talked about the concentration of the working class in enterprises sort of being the social condition on which to challenge the bourgeois capitalist social order. Um, how does the decline of especially manufacturing workers and unionized workers really impact the struggle that we're going to pursue today? And I have some follow-up questions related to that on unions, but just generally, kind of the impact of deindustrialization on the struggle.
Okay, so you're asking me the easy questions first, right?
We'll start with the easy ones. Yeah.
Yeah, this is kind of this is the question for the labor movement and for the Marxist movement, really, for our whole lifetime, the lifetime of our from the 70s onwards is, this decline in on many levels, the decline in membership of unions, the decline in political power of the labor movement, the decline in political power of political parties, to the point now where both political parties champion uh, their representation of the wealthiest, the oligarchy that runs the country. There's virtually no political space within either party uh, to address working class issues, virtually none. Whereas, many of us grew up with at least the semblance of Democrats addressing issues of employment, of jobs, of inflation, of labor, unionization. That basically is no longer even an agenda item. So, as you say, the financialization of capital, and this is, I think, is pretty much a consensus of, this turn that really kind of took off in the 70s and then especially in the 90s with globalization and the opening up of huge markets throughout the world to American capital, that they really could replace the manufacturing base of the United States with a service base, and that doesn't mean they didn't no longer produce anything or produce any value. Of course, workers still do, but they are not organized in the same way. Instead of having workplaces of 10, 20,000 workers in one spot, they are now, little offices throughout the entire country of little shops and stores and restaurants and McDonald's and financial service companies that may have a couple of thousand people in them, but no longer concentrated, all working on one productive process where they have to interact with each other. And that is kind of the social environment, which really, in Marx's time, and of course in Lenin's time, and even in the early years of the labor movement in the United States, drew people together, forced them together. You have to work side by side with your coworker where you actually trust them with your life. In my workplace, we had people working side by side, and if, particularly in the Ford shop, if someone in the Ford shop screwed up, they could kill someone else easily. And that did happen. When I was in working, I think it was 74, I'm sorry, 84. Um, we had an industrial accident where they were trying to speed up the work process too quickly, and someone left a crowbar in the die of the forge. It came down and shattered the crowbar and exploded and went through someone's head and killed them. So this is the kind of work process which, has intense pressure on workers to speed up, to work together, to cooperate with each other. And these work processes are all now being virtualized and separated in place and time so that those 10,000 workers which used to work together are now independent entities working out in their living rooms or perhaps in a sales office somewhere. So of course, yes, this is an entirely different social environment, but that doesn't mean that production doesn't still happen. It still happens to a huge degree in the United States, just among a much, much smaller proportion of the population.
You started to get into the next question I was going to ask, which is about the internet and remote work. And you did mention the challenges that that poses. Um, do you have any thoughts about how those challenges can be addressed? Um, is there also an advantage to be taken advantage of by the remote work and people's connection to each other through social media and remote work? What do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. The first part of your question actually was addressed, by Lenin's work on what is to be done, and where he said, essentially, you need structure, you need organization, because spontaneously workers will resist. They will resist exploitation. They will resist pressure, speed up unemployment, and all the other factors which capital always impresses upon them. They'll resist that, but they will not necessarily take a revolutionary perspective. They will not see their labor as the key to unwinding the entire process of capital. So it does take organization, propaganda, uh, education, and that can happen through, of course, in the case of Russia or other revolutionary situations, a Marxist party, a communist party that organizes and propagandizes and explains to workers and goes to the workplace and instructs them. And your final part of your question opens up that real question of how does that happen in today's society? Well, a good example of a potentiality is that we have seen in the last um, decade or so, this tremendous growth of leftists on the internet. Some of them actually end up truly organizing into a party, or I wouldn't call it a party, maybe an amalgam of some type, which is the DSA, which is kind of a reformist type of leftism. But nonetheless, many in that group call themselves Marxists. They read Capital. Many read the Communist Manifesto. Perhaps maybe 10 or 15% of them would actually, consider themselves Marxists, left Marxists who believe in revolution. Um, Many of them are more Bernie-like and believe in some kind of evolutionary socialism. I don't know what. But I would turn that back on you. I mean, do you believe that, working on a screen and posting to a social media is a progression of consciousness of the working class? I mean, I don't know. Maybe it is. I can't really tell.
It would seem to be a necessary element, but I think if you stop with that, then there's a problem there. I
Yeah,
think also
like a
people,
precursor or something, right?
yeah, something that's a necessary but not sufficient to get the job done. I mean, I often wonder why. I know everywhere I go, including demonstrations and things like that, you see the Jehovah's Witnesses with their watchtower groups standing there and proselytizing and talking to people. And somehow we've sort of fallen back on even the old days of using soapbox speeches and so forth, where people congregate. I have a couple other quick questions, and then again, I'm going to tell people to start uh, pulling your questions together. We're going to shift over to audience questions in a moment. In your slide on the decline in manufacturing employment, you also had another very compelling slide about the decrease in union membership. And we are in a situation today where union membership is at lows that we haven't seen. I mean, you can comment on that from what period, going back 100 years. Do you see rebuilding the unions as an integral part of this struggle to um, to promote revolution against the capitalist system? And what role will unionization play? And how do we avoid falling into the trap of just looking for improvement in the wage system rather than the abolition of the wage system that Marx advocated? So, union rebuilding, is that something that we should be working on? And is it going to happen? If not, then what organizations might also be formed?
Again, another kind of key question that has been on the front burner for the entire labor movement for the last 70 years. Just seeing the decline is and the gutting of the unions is it's just gut-wrenching. I mean, it's horrible to see. Yet at the same time, it you don't want to, I don't think we want to confuse the union movement or the struggle for better wages, working conditions with a revolutionary struggle, because of course it is not. The process of struggle against capital is like we said before, is a spontaneous struggle, and it will happen, and it will happen within the context of bourgeois society, within the legal context, within the property relations that exist, and the struggle will not by itself automatically of its own nature extend to the abolition of private property. This takes an entire different contingency that can happen. Of course, it did happen and does happen in revolutionary situations where unions become actually involved in the revolutionary struggle. Uh, you know, occupying factories or taking over production as a whole in a revolutionary situation. But nonetheless, your question really kind of brings out the fact that without unions, there is no context, there is little context through which to educate, propagandize, bring together people, raise their consciousness, teach them of the how the extraction of the value from their labor is used against them, and to bring to the fore the consciousness of seeing these property relations, which underpin all of capitalist production, as the actual cause and social fabric, which has to be torn, as Marx said in the manifestos, torn asunder and replaced with socialized ownership of production. So again, it's in some ways a chicken and egg question, but on the other hand, it's not a panacea. It is something, of course, we all search for and try to do, continue to organize, but as you may know, in the 1930s, it was not simply the effort of union leaders and often communists that actually brought the tens of thousands of people into the unions. It was also a social movement, and particularly during World War II, the kind of united front of the entire society against Nazism, against the struggle against fascism, that brought, thousands and tens of thousands of people into the union movement because they saw unions as an answer to the kind of existential questions. So there are social factors that can and will in the future bring people into unions more than simply going around and asking someone to sign up a membership card.
Okay, I want to ask a question about imperialism and imperial decline. Lenin wrote his Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, over 100 years ago. And I don't want to kind of digress into a separate presentation, a separate topic, but I do want to ask you, what do you see has changed that bears upon our situation today? And in particular, the in what ways must our understanding of imperialism be updated and expanded to account for the changes that have the huge changes that have taken place? And I'll say, to tie this back into your topic of your presentation, especially the changes that have taken place since the 70s, and how you see the dynamics of changes in imperialism affecting the working class and working class struggle today.
Again, another easy question. No, seriously, yeah, difficult question. And a I gotta reach back even a little bit earlier than the 70s, because this question of imperialism changing its nature and really kind of presenting an entirely new form, or a new cataclysm that is happening now, and it is a cataclysm. There's no question about it. And as we see in the war in Iran, um, this this the nature of capital to expand has always been there, and this is something that Marx wrote about in 1867 in Volume One. That this capital expands overseas. It has implications for ending the rule of capital, and both Marx and Engels often talked about the only way the British working class is ever going to be free of capitalism is by uh, helping Irish workers to overthrow capitalism in Ireland. And it was, a tremendous, constant thing they kept coming back to, the whole Irish question of the imperial exploitation of Ireland by British capital, which would never allow British labor to be free without actually freeing the oppressed working people of Ireland first. And this is continued through Lenin's imperialism and, of course, through the American rise after World War I of American capital to dominate the world to the point where World War II, uh, it was uniquely positioned as the only country that virtually never got touched by the World War, being situated in North America, surrounded by oceans, and that once again we're seeing in the current world that the geographic situation in the United States prevents it from being uh, attacked or being threatened by other powers in the world, such as Russia or China or Iran, for that matter, and can therefore uh, project its power overseas. But all good things come to an end, and as you know, the rise of capitalist production in Russia, Iran, India, China presents a absolutely hugely powerful counterweight to American capital. Not that it is necessarily better, but it is a another peer with which the United States has to contend with and cannot project its power overseas. So, it is, reaching definitely a new stage of imperialist uh, domination that uh, can no longer project its power into Ukraine, into Iran, into the South China Sea. And a lot of the reasons it can no longer do this is technological changes, the emergence of drones, of high quality missiles that Iran and Yemen can produce. So there are many answers to that question, but I think the short answer is that the liberation movements or national movements of independence, and whether they be powered by, national bourgeoisies or in collaboration with, working populations of those countries, like in Iran, do have more and more uh, sovereignty, that they are pushing the United States out of all these different locations around the world and being replaced by capital of a different form. Not socialism, but uh, sovereign capital of a contending power, peer power.
Okay, I have one last question. Maybe this one we can expand upon in the Q&A. But in your presentation, you talked about the Lenin's writings on the role of a revolutionary party. And I know this is a bit of a crystal ball type question, but how do you see the kind of the emergence of that force in the U.S. today? Maybe you could comment a little bit about what you're seeing on the left, quote unquote, among different parties, and the DSA, which I think you've had some experience working with. Um, let's do that one kind of a short answer, and maybe then we can go over to the hands that are going up. We have quite a few hands that have been raised. So, what
Yeah,
are your thoughts about
yeah,
the development of the left, if you have any?
yeah. I think it is a very short answer, unfortunately.
Yeah.
The development of the left is a short answer, and when I first discovered Marxism, I was a teenager, and I read Manifesto and a couple other works, and I was convinced that revolution was going to happen any day. I mean, it was coming. I was sure. 50 years later, I'm not quite as overly optimistic, but there are locations there people are developing a Marxist consciousness, not a Marxist movement. That's different. I've run capital study groups in a couple of different places, including DSA and others, just basically random people that are interested. Uh, and there is tremendous interest out there. There's no question. Never has there been so much interest in Marxism. The only difference, of course, is there is no organized force to coalesce all that. And I'm hoping some of your participants will actually give us some ideas about where that may lead to, where it might come from.
Perfect transition to the question and answer part of our session today. I just want to say after a few short announcements, we're going to have questions and comments from participants. To ask question, raise your hand by clicking on the reactions button, raise hand at the bottom of your Zoom window. We're going to ask people to keep your questions short, one question at a time to allow everyone to participate. And keep in mind that this is a comradely forum for political discussion. Please show respect to other participants and the moderator of today's session. We have programs coming up next week. We have an important program. There's a lot going on, obviously, in the Middle East and West Asia, and the Kurds in particular, the Kurdish nationalities that are spread across four different countries in the Middle East are coming up and playing an important role in the developments in West Asia. We're going to have a very important speaker next week, Ertugrul Kulksu, who will be speaking to us from Germany. He's actually a very prominent figure in Turkish politics and Kurdish issues. He's a geopolitical analyst and political activist, and he's going to be speaking on the situation in Turkey and the Kurdish question, how it's figuring into developments in the Middle East. Check our website for more information and to sign up to receive email notifications for future programs, ICSSmarks.org. And with that, we're going to go to, wow, we have a lot of hands that have been raised. I'm going to start with Stan and go to Sharon after Stan. Let's try and keep it short because we kind of got a little bit of a late start here. So, Stan, if you would unmute yourself and go ahead and ask your question or make a comment.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. My name is Stan Woods. I'm from Oakland. Speaking of DSA, I'm a member of the East Bay DSA, which covers Alameda County and Contra Costa County. And after this, I'm going to the general meeting, this monthly general meeting. One thing about DSA, as an older guy, I'm in my 70s now, I'm about double the average age of DSA. And that's one thing that's very, very heartening about DSA. Double, and there's many in their 20s and even in their teens. And that's the way it should be. Unfortunately, in this call, not so much. And we should really try our effort. Maybe I'll publicize it on DSA list, try to get DSA participants, younger DSA comrades to participate. Big difference we have in DSA. The previous DSA, up until the Sanders campaign, was almost like a appendage to the Democratic Party. It always endorsed Democrats, no matter how bad they were. Now, though, many Democrats are not endorsed, though some are. And one criteria is that any Democratic candidate for anything, Congress, Senate, City Council, has to oppose U.S. military aid for Israel, which excludes a lot of Democrats, not all, but a lot. And we have a clean break faction, which I'm part of. I'm also with Peace and Freedom Party, who want total independence from the Democratic Party. Then we have a dirty break faction that says yes, but not now. Where do you stand on that? Do you support independent left parties like the Peace and Freedom Party, Green Party, and others are on the ballot in different states? Or do you feel they use the often used and overused term of working within the Democratic Party? Thank you.
That's interesting, really, to hear your participation in DSA. It must be interesting, seeing large numbers of young people come out and they have a whole different attitude towards politics than the more jaundiced of our older generation, perhaps. But they're enthusiastic. I think it's great. Whether that leads to anything, DSA, is not a party. It's an association of people. It's a coalescence of people of similar types of views, but I can't say that uh, I would encourage anybody to participate in any leftist party whatsoever, whether that be Green Party or other parties that have support of labor. Uh, I can tell you that I just understand that DSA just endorsed a uh, Alexandria Cortez just like last week by a vote of like 80%. It was hotly debated because she, as you know, supported the Iron Dome. She voted to against, she voted to break the railroad worker strike. She has repeatedly, over multiple votes, supported NATO's expansion into Ukraine and sending weapons to NATO and to the Ukrainian war against Russia. So, I don't know what I can say about politics of various leftist parties other than to say that, I certainly encourage people to get involved and to most especially provide a Marxist critique of positions within those parties, speak up and defend what Marx and Lenin, you know, promoted.
Okay, next is Sharon, followed by Citizen One. So Sharon, if you would unmute and please go ahead.
Thank you, Peter. I have a comment and then a question. So speaking of war, as a very old veteran of the peace movement, I believe that it was wrong to have opposed the draft, although we were not the ones who caused the draft to end. It was the ruling class that wanted that to end. And it's part of the fact that there's no draft in the United States is part of the aristocratic relationship of the US working class vis-a-vis the international proletariat. But that's a whole other discussion. My question has to do with AI. So as Marx said, Marxists understand capitalism contains the seeds of its own destruction. So what does the bourgeoisie have in mind when they're going to implement AI in all kinds of different industries that will reduce employment of human beings by a lot? So we're going to have far more working class people unable to find jobs and high school and college graduates unable to find decent jobs. And who are they think they're going to sell all their products to if we've got such a huge depression in the United States caused by the implementation of AI? I guess they think they can market all their stuff around the world, the stuff produced by AI.
You're actually raising something that was really kind of addressed by Marx in Value, Price, and Profit, which he wrote, I think, in 1865, if I'm not mistaken, which is the the production improvements and productivity that create more value, which lay off workers, and therefore capitalists can find less and less people to purchase their products. And that's certainly true in a consumer economy when you're relying on people to purchase your products as opposed to an economy that's producing capital goods, which you would sell to other capitalists. So, yeah, I mean, it is a good question. Although to be honest, I'm not sure I see AI as particularly different from many of the other, means of increasing productivity. I mean, computers have been around, since 1950s, 40s or 50s when IBM was using it to calculate the trajectory of projectiles for the military. So, it's certainly going to become more intensive and replaces more and more. But whether it's AI or a computer numerical control lathe that replaced a lot of the workers that I worked with, it is really the same process, the same dynamics.
Or the
So that's
machines that the Luddites threw their shoes into.
exactly.
Okay. Next is Citizen One, followed by Mehmet. So, Citizen One, if you would unmute, please, and go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Before my question, I'd first like to ask Stan Woods if he could post information on how to attend DSA meetings in the East Bay, what their schedule is, or maybe a website, whatever. If they uh, have Instagram post or whatever. And also, I would encourage him to try to get one of these younger generation people from DSA to do a presentation here on these Sunday morning forums. So my question is, leftists often, and especially Marxists, often use the term workers. And I've abandoned that term myself for personal use in favor of working people, because workers seem to connote just so-called blue-collar workers, whereas, today, white and pink-collar workers, the middle class is catching plenty of hell too. They're having to work onerous hours. They're having to suffer perhaps nearly as badly war-caused raging inflations and all this sort of stuff. And you mentioned how in the plant or factory, a worker's mistake could get someone else killed. Well, air traffic controllers aren't usually regarded as quote working class. I think that term is actually divisive of workers. They're working class. They're blue collar, and we get to work in offices, air conditioned offices. So, I mean, you may know in Britain, general physicians kind of go on strike about every 2 or 3 years because of the onerous hours that they have to work. There are plenty of lawyers who are not partnered corporate lawyers, or I should say lawyers even, who graduate from schools like UC Berkeley that have to work 60 and 80-hour weeks if they're not corporate partners. So as I said, I favor the term working people. And the last thing I'll say is, I question the use of, I guess maybe they're Marxist terms, I'm not sure, like propaganda and working class. I mean, to me, with all due respect, Peter, because I greatly appreciated your presentation, these seem to sort of be like stilted terms. I mean, propaganda may mean something positive to Marxists, but it doesn't mean anything positive to ordinary people, just like private property. We as Marxists understand what that is, but, ordinary people don't want private property abolished. They don't want someone coming in and taking their flat screen TV. So
Yeah.
versus
Okay,
what we
good.
understand as personal property. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I respect your differences. I would say, and I agree entirely that the working class is not limited to blue collar or manual labor or anything else. When I organized for 1199, I organized a hospital in Connecticut of, I think it was about 1,200 people, Middletown Mental Hospital, which had doctors who joined the union. These are, the highly educated professional members who were actually quite militant. And likewise, even these type of healthcare workers can be sacrificed, risking their lives. They had an ICU unit at this hospital where they had very violent people that had come out of prison and were their jobs were very stressful. And so there is no real, I agree, there is no real distinction other than that of workers that produce surplus value versus workers that do not produce surplus value. But that doesn't necessarily dictate their ideology or their revolutionary views or anything else. So I think you do have some points that we could probably agree on.
Next up is Mehmet, followed by Janet. So Mehmet, please go ahead.
Yeah, Peter, thank you very much for in-depth and also
Can you get a little closer to your mic?
yeah. Thank you very much for an in-depth information, very informative and necessary, presentation that you presented here. Now, you showed how the wages have either stayed flat or went down while the productivity shoot through the roof. Okay. So that is dream come true for capitalists. Just imagine, your profits and productivity going up and not paying enough to the workers who produce the surplus value. But isn't that goes against what most of the Marxists or the left is saying, that capitalism is in crisis? So, what kind of a crisis is there that we say, well, that's why we're moving to China? Imperialism is, this and that. But because one of the reasons for imperialism is that the surplus value, the profits at home, is not as attractive as what you would get elsewhere. What do you think is happening there? Is capitalism in crisis or not?
Great question. And I like the examples you raised because it is exactly that seeming contradictory, aspects of what we see before us that make us wonder, well, if capital is in crisis, how come they are still expanding? How come capital keeps growing and growing, yet is still in crisis? And this kind of gets into a very interesting but long discussion of crisis theory, and that a lot of Marxists talk about that study capital and other political economic works. Much of the crisis that Marx talks about in Capital, is particularly in Volume 3, revolves around credit and finance capital, and he does not have a theory that crisis leads to a collapse. That you will not find anywhere in Capital, even though many social democrats or others in history have said that this is leading to a collapse. But nonetheless, it does not mean either that crises aren't continually happening. I can think of an example where I was, the production facilities at a plant that I was at basically became obsolete within a year because competitors introduced, highly sophisticated machinery, and therefore made this whole method of production no longer profitable, or only marginally profitable. And this is crisis of capital. This is the crisis of trying to circulate capital. When, one section of capitalists making a product find a way to increase productivity, all the other capitalists go into crisis because they're using an older method which uses up more labor to produce it, and therefore cannot produce the amount of profit, the rate of profit that the new producers can use. So therefore, it is a crisis of capital, which then destroys those sections of capital that are not as profitable as the productive ones. So this crisis is continually happening. It doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. And certainly runaway shops that we've all seen happen are evidence that this is a crisis of capital. It's destruction of existing capital that is no longer as profitable as other sections of capital. It is the moving of capital overseas. It is the crisis that we're seeing in private credit right now, where people are demanding that private credit give them back their investment even though private credit companies can't actually come up with the money, and it's causing all kinds of problems in the bond market. I mean, this is constant crisis. We're used to this. So it doesn't mean the capital is ending. It just means the capital is constantly in crisis and destroying itself and is, I would say, exposes its reactionary and retrograde nature, even while at the same time sometimes exposing its progressive nature and creating things that make it easier for us.
Thank you.
Okay, next is Janet, followed by Jean. So Janet, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Peter. What can be included in your hourly compensation versus profit chart or a separate chart is something that went along with the flattening of wages starting in the 70s, and that is the rise of debt of workers and the growth of credit products and the credit industry that also involves alienated labor. I know that because I worked in that industry. So I'm moving on. I'm going to put my comments in the form of a series of some quick, short related questions. When you began working in the steel industry, did you ask what the radar parts you made with your alienated labor were used for? When did you learn they were being used in bombers? Regardless, doesn't alienated labor lead to implicitly causing workers who work in factories that create parts for the military to be complicit in wars they are used for? The same goes for workers in the credit industry that feeds on putting workers in debt. And then just finally, shouldn't everyone ask what their labor is being used for when they are trying to be hired or when they start a job?
Great question, actually. I'm glad you asked that because it has come up for me many times. And I'm sure it comes up for everybody when you go to work and you start to think about what are you producing? What is this, whether the product or the service that you're giving people or whatever, there always is that question, what is my responsibility? And of course, as a Marxist, I see I know that my labor is simply my labor power is what is being rented for the day. And that person that rents my ability to do something actually owns the final product. I have no control over it. I may think I want to have control over it. I may attempt to have control over it, but I can't. And it is the actual existence of this private capital on the capitalist side that is totally outside the bounds of our own control. I worked on many products, for example, working on Apache helicopters. Many of the people I worked with either were veterans or some are Vietnam vets. Many were people that came out of the Navy and were young, had never seen war. And they were always the most enthusiastic about war. The people that actually seen it, the Vietnam vets, despised any suggestion of going to war by anybody. But the difference is, again, this clash between labor and capital. Labor has one thing to do, and that is to use the sale of its labor power to try and support itself and prevent its decline through capital's onslaught. Once the labor is in a product, we have no control over it. So I don't really, I didn't, I guess you could say I caused myself to be fired from a place that was making parts for a B-52 bomber because I was a liberal at that time and believed that I had a duty not to do certain things. I don't just, I don't object to people feeling that way, and many do and choose their occupation, but labor as a whole has no control over choosing its occupation. It's forced to sell its labor to the highest, to any bidder, and sometimes you can't even find a bidder for your labor. So it's a long answer to a very good question that doesn't have a clean answer.
Hey, Gene, if you would unmute, followed by Jim. So Gene, please go ahead.
Okay, I'm unmuted, I think. Okay, Peter, that was great talk. I thank you for it. I'll just say I'm a retired worker also, and I have my pension deducted from my retirement class check. And also, my dad was a steel worker, so I have these same origins. But I did teach anthropology for over 40 years. So I look at these things as an anthropologist. And as such, I note that the things that were, the period of American dominance, when, United States, was the richest, most powerful country in the world, that corresponded to what the Chinese call the century of humiliation, when China was the poor man of Asia and people look at China, as a country that's just totally a basket case. But now we have the situation reversed, and now we see China. China has the largest union in the world. 300 million members are involved in the Chinese All China Workers Union. It also has the biggest banks in the world, four of the largest banks. It controls so much of things, and it's also a country that is leading the world in so many ways. So it seems to me like there's been a major shift here in what's happening, and I would also say that China defines itself as a socialist country, and they mention in their constitution that it is a dictatorship of the proletariat, or of the workers and peasants. But anyway, I just want to throw out these ideas, and I'm not sure, for you to think about, and if you have any comments on this. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, I do understand that China says they are a socialist country run by the working class, and I think that whole topic is probably a little bit foreign to what we're trying to discuss. But I think it's a really great question to try and elaborate on in a more in-depth session than what we have today.
Okay, Jim, if you would unmute, followed by Richard Wright. So Jim, please go ahead.
Okay, so I loved your statement about Marx's work. Marx said workers are conditioned by the past, and alienated labor makes weapons of that the idea that it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. And I also like when you said alienated labor makes weapons of war and maintains capital's domination. And I take off of that soldiers are alienated with moral injury, and more on that. I was aware of feeling alienated in the very few manufacturing jobs I had, and I joined the military to get away from it. And there, because of my experiences in the military, excellence was important. But the most appealing part was Wilhelm Reich, who was part of the Frankfurt School or preceded it, where they tried to understand why workers don't revolt. And in the course of that, I also connected with Richard Lichtman, who wrote The Manufacturing of Desire, which I think is related to that. and also Art of Loving Eric Fromm is how I got into Marxism. And in 79, I went to the DSOC conference and argued with Michael Harrington and organized people to make sure that DSOC, the forerunner to DSA, did not endorse nuclear power. And then in the 80s, the Nuclear Freeze campaign, we had an economic conversion conference, which would have been for the workers to be able to organize the means of production to replace the defense work they were doing.
2 minutes.
So that's my history. And what I'm wondering about is how do we organize? Perhaps the time for the Frankfurt School to be involved in changing the consciousness of workers is more important. I have the privilege of being involved with Michael Lerner and the president of New College, because they brought a bunch of us together and they were setting up groups for workers that were alienated, for example, in having to buy Christmas presents they couldn't afford, and things like that, or coming home and screaming at the wife because of how they were treated at work. And
Jim, we need to actually
that didn't get anywhere.
We need to move on.
Where we have to take off. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's fine. Good stories. I'm there are a number of good points you raised. I'm not sure I'm an expert in answering many of them, so we'll go on to the next.
Okay, Richard Wright, go ahead, followed by Norma, and we're going to wrap up pretty soon, so please keep them short.
Thank you. I don't know if you've been paying attention to the chat, but I've been taking some umbrage with some of your points. But but my real question is this, or my question is this. I don't think my reading of Marx is that he would be loath to maintain the continuing analysis based on industrialization. That I believe that he would be the first to say that we need to modify it or to enhance it, much as Einstein stood on the shoulders and modified Newtonian physics. And along those lines, we've seen the rise, in particular, of financial capitalism as a large measure, I think, taken over the role of industrialization, which at the time of Marx was very much a new phenomenon. Maybe you could elaborate a little bit on that. Oh, by the way, I grew up. My mother's side was in Needham, and I was on a machine shop in the Navy. So, thank you.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think you raised some good points about how Marx described capital versus the current state of capital today. As we know, you can only observe what is around you. You can't actually observe what is going to be in the future in 100 years. So nonetheless, the foundation of what he observed and critiqued and analyzed has not changed. The process of production of value has not changed. Where it's produced, yeah, you could say it's changed quite a bit. The factories are smaller. The places that value is produced is much more commonly produced in services that people sell to one another, not as commodities, or sold not as physical products, but as a service to one another. And certainly financialization has become more prominent, even though he wrote this entire third volume on the role of finance and interest in the production process. And by production, he meant production of value, not necessarily factory production or industrial production, but actual production of value. So again, I think it's I don't know. I'm not sure it really makes a whole, is really that important about, who said what, about what Marx said. It's like a kind of a distant view of whether Marx was right or not. But I think it's what is important is how do we analyze the movement of capital today and what is behind this movement. And today, the production of value is what runs the entire world. And it has not changed one iota since Marx described it in 1867. The actual production process, the transformation, the transfer of workers' efforts into value that is appropriated by capitalists has not changed at all and is at the heart of the wars and conflicts and destruction of our world today. So I think that's a valuable lesson from Marx.
Okay, Norma, followed by
Okay.
Elazar, and we're getting towards the very end here. Let's keep the question short. Norma, please
Okay,
go ahead.
I'll read you my comment off of the chat. Capitalism was allowed, and it's stuff I've said before, so don't be surprised. Capitalism was allowed to rise in the communist countries, China, Russia, by the highly aware leadership, call it imperium if you want, in order to continue the advance of communism, permit the sustenance of the workers and the distancing of it from the minds which, like Putin, had been endowed with communist minds from the glorious revolution. Of course, saving and advancing the present communist struggle in those countries and in many other countries which are using it as well for the same reason. I had a terrible, I got schooled as a teacher. I could think of nothing else to do, as much as I had told myself when I was 9 that I would never never take the job teaching, study to do that. But I couldn't find anything else to do that would be as substantial as doing school teaching. So I only was allowed ever, I never got hired in a steady job. I only was allowed ever to do substitute teaching. And every day standing there for the whatever 5 hours or 4 hours or 3 hours to complete the day to be done, what I was doing was saying to myself, well, that's another $20, $50, whatever it was. It was and that perception of who the working people are became outstanding, and of course being followed through. I've been a communist since I was born. My mother and father were, and my grandparents were.
2 minutes.
Okay, so Peter?
Yeah, I didn't really hear a question there. So
Okay. All right, so next is Elazar, followed by
Oh, I
Judith, and we're
need
going to
to
wrap
say
up.
something.
Well,
I need to
actually,
say
we're going to move
something.
on now. So,
Peter, thank you very much for your presentation.
okay. Elazar, please go ahead.
Am I unmuted?
Yeah, you're fine.
Okay. What I'm thinking about is how a revolutionary movement would do two things. One, deal with the changing profile of the working class in the United States and the export of capital, moving an enormous amount of industrial operations in other countries where they do have large scale production, that we need to have the export of labor organizing so that a revolutionary, let's say in AFL-CIO, which would be pretty tough to do, would fight for unionizing all over the world wherever U.S. capital is exported. And we also need, like I live in Idaho, I see now hundreds and hundreds of trucks with little trailers. People that used to work in factories are now artisans again, like reversing the historical origin of capitalism in a sense. It began out of small scale and then it grew. Now we're back to it. So I'm trying to learn from Peter, whose presentation I was very interested in. How do we change our strategy to first of all, enumerate the profile of the working class in the United States and how to go about reunionizing it, because that is definitely a revolutionary strategy. And then how can we force on the labor organizers the attempt to organize wherever U.S. capital is? And of course, each country would have its own inventory on that. Thank you.
Well, good question. It raises to me an issue which I didn't really touch on, but is important, and that is that what type of sector you work in has a huge impact on whether or not you can even organize a union. For example, private business, they'll fire your ass, in a second. They don't care whether it's against the law or whatever. There's almost very little enforcement of the law. So it's extremely difficult. There's high turnover, et cetera. So a lot of private employment situations are very hard to organize, whereas public employment, you have somewhat of a social contract that a municipality or state or federal government is pretending to comply with society, and therefore it takes much less umbrage when people organize or is maybe restricted more in busting unions. So certainly in certain sectors of the economy, you can organize a lot more, and you see that in the numbers today among private industry. It's less than 6% is organized, whereas among municipal and other workers, state and government workers, I don't remember, it's maybe 15 or something like that. So that the total number of people organized is around 10%. So, or maybe a little bit higher. So again, it does, it does make a difference, and also labor's attempts to, for example, the AFL-CIO has made attempts internationally to organize, and the history of that is reprehensible, of course. The AIFLD initially was underwritten by the CIA, and then the Solidarity Center is likewise underwritten by the intelligence deep state community of the United States, NED, et cetera, have all fund these AFL initiatives overseas. So I don't expect, without any kind of real break in political movements in the United States, I don't expect the organized labor leadership to change international organizing anytime soon. But maybe I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong.
Okay, last question. Judith, please go ahead. You're unmuted. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Okay, well, thank you, Peter. That was very interesting. And I want to say something, but first I'd like to ask you, do you actually belong to some not communist or socialist or leftist political group? Because I can't find any to join.
If you find one, let me know, please.
Oh, okay. All right. So what I wanted to say was everybody has to watch Richard Medhurst's latest video. because the United States has just enacted their own blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, and they're going to go after any tanker, any ship from any country that has passed through it and paid a toll to Iran, which Trump is calling extortion, and and uh, and they are well. Anyway, Medhurst has shown how the entire scheme of the United States is to dominate world energy and to crush their rivals, Russia and China, and to cannibalize their allies, Europe, and they have arranged. He says they're now switching from an air force to a maritime force, and they're dominating the seas and blocking shipping, so that anyway. So the thing is, will Russia and China retaliate? because the United States has been seizing their ships
That's
under the
2 minutes.
Okay, all right. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
Okay, we're going to be following this question pretty closely next week, having a talk on the Turkey and the Kurdish question. We're stay tuned. Go to our website, icssmarks.org, to sign up for future programs for notifications. Uh, Send us a comment, question, make a donation to support our work. Peter, I want to thank you for your session today. I think you raised a lot of very thought-provoking questions and some good observations and ideas about what's going on. So with that, we're going to stop the recording and thank you everybody for coming, and we'll see you next week.